All right, so let's jump right in. For a long, long time, our cities were just filling up with these silent, kind of imposing boxes of glass and steel. Yeah, they were elegant, they were minimal, but, for a lot of people, they were just mute. They didn't say anything. And then a rebellion started, a whole movement that decided buildings should start talking again. So welcome to the super playful, often provocative, and pretty misunderstood world of postmodern architecture. And it all kicks off with one of the greatest clapbacks in design history, honestly. So the modernists, right? They had this mantra, less is more. You've heard it a million times. Well, architect Robert Venturi took one look at the stark, unadorned world they were building and just fired back with this legendary line. Less is a bore. I mean, talk about a declaration of war against architectural silence. But you might be wondering, okay, but what was so boring, right? I mean, what was actually wrong with those clean, rational, modernist designs? Well, to really get why this rebellion happened, we've got to first understand the silence that came before it. See, by the 1960s, the whole modernist style, which you have to remember was once this super radical vision for a better world, well, it had kind of become the default look for corporate headquarters and these huge impersonal public projects. It went from revolutionary to just routine. And that early utopian promise, it felt completely betrayed. The international style was supposed to be this universal thing, good for everyone, everywhere. But in reality, it just felt connected to nowhere. People felt alienated, They felt dwarfed by these massive buildings that had nothing to do with their culture, their history, or even their own humanity. And this whole crisis really came to a head with a kind of 1-2-3 punch. First up, the symbolic crisis. In 1963, New York's magnificent, beautiful Penn Station was just torn down. And for what? For a purely functional box. People were outraged. Then came the moral crisis. In 1972, the Pruitt-Igoe housing project, which had become notorious for crime, was literally dynamited. It was the stunning public admission that modernist social planning had been a disaster. And finally, you had the aesthetic crisis. That once radical minimalist style, it became the default look for high-end fashion boutiques, completely stripped of any of its original revolutionary meaning. And check this out for drama. The architect and critic Charles Jenks didn't just say modernism was over. Oh no, he gave it a precise time of death. He declared that modern architecture died on July 15, 1972, at the exact moment the Pruitt-Igoe towers came crashing down. I mean, that is a powerful symbolic nail in the coffin for an entire era. So, if modernism was dead, what was next? Well, the answer wasn't some new, single, unified style, not at all. It was a whole new way of thinking. Postmodernism's big, central idea was that architecture is a language, and it was way past time for our buildings to start having conversations with us again. And to make that happen, they came up with some really clever strategies. The first key concept you've got to know is called double coding. The best way to think about it is like a Pixar movie. Right? There's this simple, fun story for the kids, and then there's this whole other layer of witty jokes and clever references that go right over their heads just for the adults. Everyone enjoys the movie, but they get something different out of it. And that idea leads directly into our next one, multivalency. This is the concept that a building can hold multiple meanings all at the same time. And get this, no single meaning is the one correct one. It's basically an invitation to you, the viewer, to interpret it, to find your own story in its design. So, okay, theory's great. Let's see how this stuff actually works in the real world. Okay, our first case study. This is, it's widely considered to be the very first postmodern building ever, the Vanna Venturi house. And it is an absolute masterclass in multivalency, even though, at first glance, it looks deceptively simple. So here we have it. The man himself, Robert Venturi, designed this house for his own mother. And yeah, first glance, it looks like, a house, pretty simple, but I want you to look closer because every single element you see here is part of this dense, super witty conversation with centuries of architectural history. So the first reading of this building, it's the most obvious one. It's what everyone sees. You've got the classic pitched roof, a big old chimney, a front door. It's the universal symbol for home, right? That's layer one, totally accessible to absolutely everyone. But then you look a little closer and you start to notice things. That gable roof, it's split right down the middle. The chimney is kind of huge, isn't it? And the windows, they don't match up. Now, for an architect, these aren't mistakes. They're quotes. That broken gable, for example, is a direct wink and a nod to Mannerist palaces in Rome. This is multivalency in action, folks. It's a simple house, and it's a complex essay on architectural history all at the same time. Okay, so that's how it works for a small house. But how in the world do you apply these same ideas to a towering skyscraper? How do you make a giant corporate office building actually speak to the public? Well, this is where double coding comes back in, but on a massive scale. And the architect here, Philip Johnson, is such a fascinating character. This is the guy who helped define the pure, sleek, glass and steel modernist skyscraper. And then not even 2 decades later, he turns around and designs this, a massive granite tower with what looks like a piece of antique furniture on top of it. It was a complete 180. Nobody saw it coming. And this building just brilliantly shows the power of a good nickname. The public immediately started calling it the Chippendale skyscraper. Why? Because that broken pediment on top looked exactly like a classic Chippendale highboy dresser. It was memorable, it was kind of funny, and boom, the building had an instant identity with everyone on the street. And this is the perfect example of double coding in action. For the average person on the street, it's the skyscraper with the funny, memorable top. But for an architectural historian, it's a dense, complex collage of historical forms. And here's the key. Both readings are totally correct, and both were totally intentional. The building was successfully speaking 2 different languages to 2 different audiences all at once. Now, you have to understand, postmodernism wasn't just one single look. Not even close. It was this absolute explosion of creativity that produced an incredible diversity of styles. So let's just take a quick look at a few examples to see the sheer range of this movement and maybe figure out which ideas really stuck around. On one hand, you had these incredibly playful, almost theatrical buildings. Take Charles Moore's Piazza d'Italia in New Orleans. He took classical Italian forms and then outlined them in garish shopping mall neon. It was this amazing collision of high culture and low culture that was just pure fun. But then you also had these incredibly sophisticated, thoughtful collages, like James Stirling's Neustadtgalerie in Germany. I mean, look at this. You have these rich, beautiful, traditional stone walls sitting right next to these brightly colored industrial pipes and handrails. It's a building that feels ancient and totally modern, all at the same time. And then there was this stuff that was just monumental, bombastic even. You have Ricardo Bofill in France, who took these classical forms, columns, pediments, you name it, and just blew them up to this surreal, almost cinematic scale for massive social housing projects. Just wild. So, after all that wild creativity, what's the actual legacy? What did postmodernism leave behind? Well, 3 of its biggest ideas are now just a totally normal part of how we think about architecture. First, the idea that buildings have a right to communicate, that's widely accepted now. Second, the idea of designing in response to a building's surroundings, what we call contextualism, that's pretty much the norm. And third, pluralism, this idea that there is no single correct style, well, that's just the world we live in now. There's this great quote from James Stirling that I think just nails it. Architects have always looked back in order to move forward, and that really gets to the heart of the movement. See, postmodernism wasn't about just getting stuck in the past or making old-timey buildings. It was about using the entire rich library of history, all of its stories, all of its symbols, to create a more meaningful, more interesting future. And that really leaves us with a final thought, a question for you. The next time you're walking down the street, I want you to take a closer look. Really look. Is that big office building trying to tell you it's powerful? Is that library designed to feel open and welcoming? Now that you know some of the language, what are the buildings in your neighborhood trying to tell you?